Ladies and gentlemen, there is a question whispered in classrooms, echoed in debates, and murmured in the minds of many who wrestle with wonder. If God created everything, then who created God? Question who created God arises from assuming that everything, including the eternal, must have a beginning. When people ask who created God, they often do so with a sincere curiosity shaped by the world they know. A world of beginnings and endings, of births and deaths, of sunrises and sunsets. Everything around us seems to come from something else. The river flows from the mountain, the child comes from the mother, the flame from the spark. It appears so natural, then, to imagine that even the one who created all must himself have been brought into being. The question springs not from arrogance, but from habit. The habit of thinking in terms of time, sequence, and cause. Yet this habit, though useful in daily life, becomes misleading when applied to what lies beyond the physical. The assumption behind the question is that everything must have a beginning, but this is not true in the absolute sense. Only those things that begin to exist require a cause for their coming into being. The very notion of beginning implies that there was once nothing, and then something came to be. It is precisely that transition from non-existence to existence which demands an explanation. The eternal, however, does not cross that boundary, for it never was nothing. It simply is. The human mind, bound as it is to the ticking of clocks and the turning of days, finds it difficult to picture something that never started. We live in a sequence of moments, and our thoughts are arranged upon the thread of time like beads. We think of before and after as absolute realities, not realizing that they belong only to the realm of creation. When we ask who created God, we are, perhaps unknowingly, trying to pull the eternal into the narrow corridor of temporality. We are attempting to measure what is beyond measure with the small ruler of our experience. Imagine a fish who has known nothing but the sea. If told that there exists something called dry land, he might ask, but where is the water there? His question would make sense in his world, but not in the one being described to him. In the same way, to ask who created the Creator assumes that he exists in the same framework as his creation, that he, too, is inside the flow of time, waiting for a moment when he began. But the very essence of the divine is that he is not in time. Time itself unfolds by his will. Every cause within the universe is dependent, contingent, and limited. To imagine an endless chain of dependent causes without a self-existent foundation is to imagine a house suspended in midair with no ground beneath it. There must be a first reality that owes its being to none other, a being that simply exists, independent, uncaused, and eternal. In our daily experience, everything that appears before us has an origin. We see a garden and think of the gardener, a melody and think of the musician, a painting and think of the artist. The human mind instinctively searches for a cause behind every effect. It is an admirable impulse, this hunger for explanation. It is what drives all science, all philosophy, all thought. But the same impulse, when carried beyond its proper limits, becomes a snare. We begin to imagine that existence itself must be caused in every case, that even the eternal and self-existent must owe its being to something else. The truth, however, is subtler. The law of causation, that every effect must have a cause, applies only to things that begin to exist. It is not a universal rule governing being itself, but a rule describing change within creation. The moment something begins, it moves from potentiality to actuality, from what could be to what now is. That movement demands an explanation. It requires a cause that brings the potential into the real. Yet something that never began does not stand in need of such a cause, for it never moved from nothingness to being. It has always been. To speak of an uncaused reality is not to violate reason, but to fulfill it. For if everything that exists were caused, then the causes would stretch backward forever, an infinite regression with no ground to rest upon. Imagine a row of dominoes toppling endlessly with no first domino to begin the motion. There would be no falling at all. The sequence of causes we observe must ultimately depend on something outside the sequence, something that does not depend on anything else. Our difficulty lies in language. We say everything exists, and with one word, everything, we unknowingly sweep the Creator and creation into a single category. But they are not the same. To exist within time is not the same as existing beyond it. The first is bound by beginnings and endings. The second is the author of both. Causes belong to the world of becoming. They presuppose change, sequence, and time. That which is beyond becoming, that which simply is, cannot be spoken of as caused, for causation itself flows from it. Consider light and shadow. A shadow has no reality apart from the object that casts it. It depends entirely on the light that defines it. Yet the light does not depend on the shadow. The shadow begins and ends with the movement of the object, but the light continues, self-radiant. Likewise, the world and everything in it is like the shadow, a dependent reality. Its being points not to itself, but to a source beyond. That source, uncaused and self-sufficient, shines without beginning or end. In our reasoning, we often confuse necessary existence with contingent existence. Contingent things are those whose being depends on conditions outside themselves, air, time, energy, matter, or will. Necessary being, on the other hand, depends on nothing else. It contains the reason for its own existence within itself. To demand a cause for a necessary being is to misunderstand what necessary means. A fire is not caused by its own warmth. Its warmth is part of what it is. In the same way, the eternal being's existence is not something acquired, but something intrinsic. When philosophers or theologians speak of the first cause, they are not pointing to one more link in a chain, but to the foundation upon which the entire chain hangs. Without that uncaused ground, every other cause becomes meaningless, a suspended explanation with nothing to rest upon. Human understanding is trained to see patterns of dependence, yet it struggles to imagine independence itself. We can picture the ripples on water, but not the stillness from which motion first arises. And so we ask, what caused the first? Unaware that by doing so we blur the line between the finite and the infinite. The finite begins and therefore is caused. The infinite neither begins nor ends, and therefore simply is. Would you like me to continue with Keynote 3, the universe, being temporal and dependent, points towards something beyond time and dependence, in the same contemplative style and expanded form? When one stands beneath the night sky and gazes upon the stars, a quiet realization begins to unfold, that everything which exists within this vast expanse carries the mark of change. The stars are born, they burn, they fade. The mountains rise from the depths of the earth and crumble back into dust. Rivers carve their courses and then dry into forgotten valleys. Every part of the universe lives by the rhythm of becoming and perishing. This rhythm, so majestic and yet so fragile, whispers that nothing here is absolute. Time, which governs the universe so completely, is itself the great revealer of dependence. It does not simply pass through things, it weaves them into its flow. Every second that ticks binds the universe to the reality of transience. To exist in time is to move from what was, through what is, toward what will be, and motion is the clearest sign of dependence. What changes cannot be the source of its own being, for it depends upon conditions that make change possible. The very fabric of the cosmos, its energy, matter, and laws, speaks of limitation. Energy cannot create itself, matter cannot explain its own existence, the laws that govern the universe could not have written themselves. Each of these requires an explanation that lies beyond itself. The more we examine the universe, the more we discover that it does not contain within it the reason for its own being. It is magnificent, yes, but not self-sufficient. It is orderly, but not self-originating. Even the grandest theories of physics, tracing the universe back to its earliest moments, do not escape this question. The Big Bang may describe the unfolding of the cosmos, but it does not explain why there was something to unfold at all. The origin of time, matter, and energy cannot be explained by time, matter, and energy themselves. To seek the reason for the universe within the universe is like searching the pages of a novel for the existence of its author. The words may tell of his style, his rhythm, his choice of imagery, but never his origin. If the universe is bound by time, then there must be something unbound by it. If everything within it depends on something else, then there must be a reality that depends on nothing. The existence of the temporal points irresistibly to the existence of the eternal. The finite cannot exist on its own. It requires the infinite as its ground. Just as a shadow cannot appear without light, the dependent cannot exist without that which is independent. There is a curious harmony in this realization. The world does not point inward, as though it could explain itself, but outward toward that which it reflects, yet cannot contain. Every sunrise, every heartbeat, every breath of wind seems to carry within it a silent testimony that it is not the source, but a signpost leading to the source. The beauty and precision of nature do not speak of randomness. They speak of intention. The laws that govern the smallest atom and the grandest galaxy do not point to chaos but to order, and order implies a mind that conceived it. The temporality of the universe is not a flaw but a clue. It reminds us that existence, as we experience it, is not self-sustaining. We are in every moment recipients rather than possessors of being. The universe, too, stands in that same relationship, vast and powerful, yet contingent. It borrows its existence as a lamp borrows its light from the fire that feeds it. To say that the universe points beyond itself is not poetry alone, it is reason. Dependence demands independence. The temporary demands the eternal. The finite demands the infinite. The universe, therefore, is not a closed system of explanation, but an open window through which we glimpse the necessity of that which transcends it. Every path of reasoning, if pursued honestly and patiently, leads the mind toward one unescapable truth. The chain of causes cannot extend backward forever. To imagine an endless sequence of dependent things, each borrowing existence from another, is to imagine a book that depends on an infinite number of unwritten pages before the first word can appear. The story would never begin. The existence of anything at all demands a foundation that does not itself require a cause, a being that is the source rather than the consequence of existence. This being, the ultimate cause, must be self-existent. To say it is self-existent is to say that its being is necessary, not optional, intrinsic, not acquired. It does not have existence the way other things do. It is existence itself. Everything else possesses being in a limited and borrowed sense. As the moon shines only by reflecting light, it does not own. But the self-existent one shines by his own essence, needing no external source. The self-existent cannot be made or born, for both imply dependence. To be made is to come into existence through another. To be born is to emerge from what preceded you. But the first cause precedes all else. There is nothing before it, beside it, or above it to confer being upon it. It simply is absolute and unconditioned. In that sense, it transcends the categories of beginning and ending. It is not an event within time, but the author of time itself. Asking when such a being began is to ask when time itself started ticking within eternity. A question that dissolves once we recognize that time is one of its creations, not its environment. The laws of nature, magnificent though they are, cannot bind that which is their source. Gravity governs matter, yet matter did not give birth to gravity. Both are expressions of a deeper order. The self-existent being is not subject to these laws because they derive from it. The architect is not bound by the bricks he arranges, nor the composer by the notes he writes. In the same way, the one who authored reality stands outside the rules that reality obeys. We often forget that the laws of the universe are not explanations of being, but descriptions of behavior. They tell us how things act, not why they exist. The law of gravity explains how planets move, not why there are planets at all. The law of energy conservation describes a pattern, not the origin of energy itself. To confuse description with causation is like mistaking the grammar of a poem for the poet's inspiration. The order of the cosmos points to a mind that conceived it, a will that sustains it, and a presence that is not contained by it. To call the ultimate cause self-existent also means that it is independent of all limitation. Whatever depends on something else is limited by that dependence. The sun is limited by the fuel it consumes. The body is limited by the air it breathes. Even the stars, those distant symbols of endurance, are bound to the laws that govern their decay. But the self-existent cause has no such boundaries. Its being does not run out, because it was never granted by another. It is not the product of a condition, but the condition upon which all products depend. If we imagine for a moment that the first cause were itself caused, the problem reappears in a higher form. We would then have to ask what caused that cause, and what caused the next, and so on without end. The mind would chase itself in circles, explaining nothing. To stop this infinite regress, reason must rest upon a being whose existence is explained by no other, a necessary being whose essence is to be. Without such a foundation, nothing else could stand. The self-existent being must also be beyond composition. Anything composed of parts depends on those parts for its unity. But what is ultimate cannot depend on constituents more basic than itself, for that would make the parts more fundamental than the whole. The self-existent, therefore, is simple, not in the sense of lacking depth, but in the sense of being indivisible, pure existence, unblended with anything else. When one reflects upon this, the mind begins to sense the grandeur of what self-existent truly means. It is not a passive state, but the very fountain of all activity. Everything that comes into being flows from it, not as water spills by accident, but as light radiates naturally from the sun. It is the eternal ground of possibility itself, the quiet center from which all motion, order, and life proceed, without depletion or change. Among the questions that sound profound but falter under scrutiny, few are as persistent as who made the maker. At first it feels sharp, even unanswerable. It carries the thrill of apparent paradox. But when examined carefully, it collapses not from lack of explanation, but from its own confusion. It treats the very idea of an uncaused cause as though it were another object within the sequence of caused things. The question, therefore, begins with a category mistake. It mistakes the infinite for the finite, the necessary for the contingent, the timeless for the temporal. To ask who made the maker is to picture the first cause standing in a queue of causes, waiting for something larger than itself to summon it into being. But the notion of maker, in its truest sense, refers precisely to that reality which stands outside the queue altogether. It is not one participant among many. It is the reason there is a queue at all. It is the ground upon which the entire chain rests, not a link within it. Once we understand this, the question loses its edge. The analogy of the North Pole helps reveal the error. If one were to travel northward, every step would indeed bring them closer to the pole, until they finally reach that point beyond which the word north ceases to apply. To ask what lies north of the North Pole is to misunderstand what north means. Its very definition ends there. In the same way, to ask who created the uncreated is to misunderstand what creator means. The term creator signifies that which does not itself require creation. To imagine a creator of the creator is to empty the word of meaning. Every question presupposes a framework. We ask who, what, and why, within the boundaries of time and sequence, because that is where our experience lies. Within that frame, causes precede effects. Things begin, grow, and end. But the first cause does not dwell inside this sequence. Time itself is its creation. The language of before and after dissolves at that level, just as the concept of north dissolves beyond the pole. When we ask who created the first cause, we are unconsciously assuming that it exists inside the very system it brought into being, that it is one more inhabitant of time rather than the origin of time. Human thought often struggles with this distinction because our imagination is tethered to sensory experience. We think in pictures, and every picture has limits. We can imagine beginnings but not beginninglessness. We can picture motion but not timeless being. When the mind encounters the concept of a self-existent cause, it instinctively tries to clothe it in familiar images, an immense being sitting somewhere, waiting, thinking, acting within a moment. But such images are metaphors, not realities. They belong to our side of existence, not to the reality they attempt to describe. Consider a story written on paper. The characters may speak of time, of days, nights, and years, but the author of the story does not live inside those days or years. He stands outside the narrative entirely, able to write the first and last chapter at once. If a character within the story were to ask, at what point in our timeline was the author born? The question would reveal more about the limitation of the character's understanding than about the author himself. So too, when the human mind asks who made the maker, it reveals that it has not yet stepped outside the story to see the author's position beyond it. Philosophers have long noted that not all questions are meaningful simply because they can be phrased grammatically. The question, "What color is jealousy?" sounds legitimate until we realize that colors belong to the realm of visible objects, not emotions. Likewise, who made the maker uses words that fit syntactically but fail semantically. It applies the concept of causation, which belongs to the realm of the contingent, to the reality that is by definition non-contingent. It is a confusion not of logic, but of category. The self-existent cause is the reason causation itself exists. It is not subject to the rule it authored. To demand a creator for the creator is to treat the rule as higher than the one who established it. It would be like demanding to know the architect's foundation before acknowledging that the architect is the reason any foundation exists at all. Causality begins with creation. It does not reach backward into the essence of the uncreated. Some thinkers, seeking to avoid this, have proposed that perhaps the universe itself is eternal, self-existing, without need of a cause. But the universe shows every sign of being contingent, composed, changing, and governed by laws it did not choose. What is made of parts cannot be self-existent, for its parts could have been otherwise. The very fact that the universe could have not existed shows that it depends on something greater than itself. The first cause, on the other hand, could not exist. Its non-existence is impossible, for then nothing could exist at all. The question, who made the maker, also hides a subtle arrogance, though often an innocent one. It assumes that human categories are broad enough to contain the infinite. It imagines that the rules which bind matter, time, and space must bind the source of matter, time, and space as well. But if the maker were bound by what he made, he would not be the maker. He would be part of the made. The very logic of the question dissolves when its assumptions are exposed. When the mind finally begins to see this distinction, that the first cause is not merely the first in a sequence, but the ground of all sequences, a quiet clarity dawns. The problem was never in the mystery of the divine, but in the limits of our categories. The question, who made the maker, was not a profound riddle waiting to be solved. It was a misapplied instinct, a misplaced curiosity born from living too long within the world of beginnings. If one begins with pure nothingness, it is impossible to move from nothing to something without an external cause. From none, being, nothing can arise, for nothingness has no potential, no will, no capacity to bring forth existence. To suggest that existence simply appeared without reason is to accept an effect without a cause, an explosion of being without any source of power to ignite it. Yet here we stand, surrounded by an ordered universe, conscious of ourselves, capable of wonder, reason, and love. Something, therefore, must underlie all this, something that does not owe its being to another, something that never became but simply is. When reason contemplates the world, it finds two kinds of existence, the possible and the necessary. The possible includes all things that could have been otherwise, the color of the sky, the pattern of the stars, the structure of the atom. These are contingent, they depend on conditions beyond themselves. The necessary, by contrast, is that which must exist, without which nothing else could exist. It is the foundation upon which all possibility rests. Without a necessary being, even possibility would have no ground to stand on, for potential requires an actuality from which it can derive meaning. Philosophers have long tried to escape this conclusion by proposing an infinite regress of causes, yet an infinite chain of dependent beings explains nothing. If every link in the chain borrows its being from another, then the entire chain still hangs in midair, unsupported. Multiplying contingencies does not remove the need for necessity. It merely pushes it farther from view. Just as an endless series of mirrors reflects light but cannot generate it, the universe and all its causes can only exist because there is a light that shines without borrowing from any other source. Some suggest that the universe itself could be eternal, existing without cause, but an eternal universe that is still composed, governed by laws, and subject to change is not necessary in itself. Its parts could have been arranged differently. Its laws could have taken another form. Its energy could have failed to exist. The possibility of difference reveals dependence. What can be otherwise cannot be the ground of all being. The necessary must be unchanging, because change implies moving from one state to another, and whatever moves from one state to another depends on something that determines that movement. This necessary being must also be eternal, for what has no cause cannot have a beginning. A beginning marks the transition from non-existence to existence, but the necessary being cannot have undergone such a transition, for that would make its existence dependent on something prior. Eternity, then, is not an extension of time stretching endlessly backward. It is the absence of time altogether. Time flows within creation. The eternal stands outside its current, the unmoved mover upon which every moment depends. Human language struggles to capture such a reality. We are creatures of sequence, and our words are born from experience. We speak of before and after, inside and outside, above and below. Yet none of these apply to the necessary being who is beyond location, duration, and measure. To say before the universal already assumes time, to say outside the universal assumes space. The necessary being is not somewhere else. He is the ground by which somewhere exists at all. The order of the universe gives powerful testimony to this. From the precise constants of physics to the harmony of biological systems, everything points to an intelligence woven into the fabric of existence. Order does not arise from chaos without reason. The laws of motion, gravity, and thermodynamics are not self-explanatory. They are mathematical expressions of a deeper rationality. If reason exists in the human mind, it must have its origin in something rational, not in blind chance. The rational cannot spring from the irrational, just as meaning cannot blossom from the meaningless. Even consciousness itself bears witness to the necessity of the eternal. Matter in motion cannot account for the reality of awareness. A stone may move when struck, but it does not know it moves. The leap from matter to mind is a leap from quantity to quality, from mechanism to meaning. Something beyond the material must account for the immaterial dimension of human life, thought, emotion, moral awareness, and the longing for truth. These are not accidents of atoms, but reflections of a higher reality in which intelligence and existence are inseparable. When the human mind traces existence backward, peeling away layers of dependence, it arrives inevitably at a being whose essence is to be. All other beings are composites, essence plus existence, potential plus realization. The necessary being, by contrast, is pure actuality, being without limitation, without potential, without composition. It does not participate in existence, it is existence. In it there is no distinction between what it is and that it is. Its reality is not received but inherent. The sufficiency of this explanation lies in its simplicity. To explain why there is something rather than nothing, one needs a being whose very nature precludes non-existence. If everything were contingent, then at some point nothing would have existed. And if nothing existed, nothing could ever come to exist. The fact that there is something at all proves that the foundation of reality cannot be contingent. It must be necessary, self-subsisting, and eternal. This understanding does not reduce the world to a cold equation. Rather, it reveals a universe that is intelligible because it proceeds from intelligence, ordered because it proceeds from will, and beautiful because it proceeds from perfection. Every fragment of existence, from the smallest grain of dust to the vastest galaxy, depends on that reality for its being at every moment. Existence is not a possession that things hold independently. It is a gift continuously bestowed. Were that necessary being to withdraw its sustaining act, the universe would vanish like a dream upon waking. In recognizing the necessity of such a being, reason does not bow to faith, but completes itself. To deny the necessary being is to deny the possibility of explanation itself. For without the eternal, nothing temporal could persist even for an instant, and without the self-existent, existence would be a word without meaning. When the mind has wandered through all the corridors of thought, from the beginnings of time to the farthest galaxies, from the motion of atoms to the stirrings of the soul, it finds that every road leads outward and upward, pointing to something beyond itself. The question, who created God, fades not because it has been silenced, but because it has been outgrown. It was born of a misunderstanding, the attempt to measure the eternal with the instruments of the temporal. Everything that begins to exist bears the mark of dependence. Yet the existence of anything at all reveals the presence of that which does not begin. The universe, magnificent and intricate, is a symphony that requires no less than a timeless composer. The laws that hold it together are not explanations in themselves. but expressions of the reason that sustains them. The first cause is not an event lost in the ancient past. It is the constant reality upon which every moment rests. Every heartbeat, every breath, every motion of a star is a silent testimony to the one who gives being without himself being given. He is not within the circle of creation, but the center around which it turns. This realization does not arise from blind belief, but from clear reason. To deny the self-existent is to deny explanation itself, for without an eternal ground there could be no change, no cause, no existence, only nothing. The necessary being is not a hypothesis among many. It is the condition for the possibility of all hypotheses, all thought, and all being. And perhaps it is here, at the end of reason's long journey, that wonder begins again, not the wonder of confusion, but of recognition. The mind bows not in defeat, but in discovery, realizing that existence itself is the greatest revelation, that behind the fragile beauty of the world stands a reality uncaused, unbounded, and eternal, sustaining all things simply by being what it is.